A racist cop, infamous for bullying black people, suddenly finds himself fighting for his life. When his world starts to crumble, the only person who rushes to his side is a black boy he once tormented. In a single heart-stopping moment, the cop sees his savior, and his next move will shock you. Stick around to find out what happens next. On a crisp autumn afternoon in a quiet part of the city, the streets of a wealthy neighborhood glistened with polished cars and manicured lawns. The air carried the subtle scent of fallen leaves and fresh coffee from a nearby cafe. In this world of privilege, Officer Derek Johnson patrolled with an air of certainty. Known for his harsh treatment of black people, he had spent years using his badge and handcuffs to impose his will on those he deemed beneath him. Derek believed he was untouchable, a man whose authority was never questioned. That day, as Derek cruised slowly down a wide, tree-lined avenue, his eyes scanned for any sign of trouble. His gaze settled on a figure on the sidewalk near a small park. Standing alone was Jamal Carter, a young black boy with eyes that held both courage and quiet resolve. Jamal was no stranger to hardship. He had grown up on these streets, navigating life with a keen sense of awareness and a heart that beat with determination. Every day he saw injustice in the way people were treated, yet he rarely spoke out. Until now. Derek pulled his patrol car over abruptly near Jamal, the sound of tires skidding on the pavement punctuating the quiet afternoon. He stepped out, gripping his handcuffs tightly, a symbol of his supposed power. His uniform was crisp, his stance imposing, and his voice carried a sneer as he approached the boy. In his mind, Jamal was just another face in the crowd, someone unworthy of notice. For years, Derek had thrown insults and used his power against black people without a second thought. Today, however, something in the air felt different. As Derek neared Jamal, he bellowed, "You need to get off this sidewalk now." His words were sharp, laced with the same disdain he had shown time and time again. The neighborhood, usually indifferent to his bluster, fell into an uneasy silence. People on the street slowed their steps and glanced over, sensing that something was off. Jamal stood still, his face a picture of calm determination, despite the tension that surrounded him. He did not raise his voice or argue back. Instead, he simply took a deep breath and slowly reached into his worn backpack. In that moment, as Derek watched with a mix of irritation and smug superiority, time seemed to stretch. The cop's eyes narrowed as he expected another snarky remark from the boy, but what came next was something no one could have predicted. Jamal pulled out a small object, carefully wrapped in a faded cloth. It was a judicial badge, one that carried the unmistakable weight of authority. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Derek's confident expression faltered as he stared at the badge in disbelief. The badge belonged not to some unseen figure, but to Jamal himself. The realization hit Derek like a shockwave. The boy he had tormented, the boy he had always belittled, was the one holding the key to his downfall. The crowded street erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. Bystanders exchanged bewildered looks. In that charged moment, the cop, who had once wielded his power with arrogance, found his world collapsing. His hand slowly released the handcuffs he had clutched so tightly. The badge in Jamal's hand was not a weapon or a threat. It was a symbol of truth and accountability that Derek had never seen coming. Jamal's eyes, steady and unyielding, locked with Derek's for just a moment. In those eyes, there was no anger or vindictiveness, only a quiet, undeniable resolve. It was as if Jamal had spent years carrying the weight of injustice, and now that weight had transformed into a power of its own. The sight of that small badge, so simple yet so profound, sent a chill down the cop's spine. For the first time, Derek felt a crack in his armor of superiority. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. The wealthy residents who had been wrapped up in their own lives now turned their attention to the unfolding drama. Some whispered, "Is that really happening?" while others watched in stunned silence, their expressions a mix of shock and a dawning sense of justice. In that single, heart-stopping moment, the balance of power had shifted dramatically, setting the stage for consequences that neither party could have imagined. Derek stood frozen, his mind reeling from the revelation. The badge did not simply belong to the boy, it belonged to a truth that now challenged everything he thought he knew about power and respect. His earlier bluster and harsh words seemed to dissolve into the cold morning air, replaced by an overwhelming sense of vulnerability and regret. For Jamal, this was not an act of revenge, but a final desperate stand for dignity. In his quiet way, he had risked everything to confront a system built on discrimination. His small, deliberate act was a beacon of hope for every overlooked soul, a promise that even the most powerful could be held accountable. As the scene unfolded on that quiet street, every eye was fixed on the moment. The rich neighborhood, with all its polished facades, bore witness to a dramatic reversal that would forever alter the lives of those involved. In that instant, a racist cop's world was turned upside down, not by a grand spectacle, but by the unwavering courage of a young black boy who refused to be invisible. In the moments after Jamal revealed his badge, time seemed to slow. Officer Derek Johnson stood frozen, his face a mix of disbelief and dawning terror. The confident swagger that had defined him moments before dissolved into a palpable vulnerability. His hand, which had gripped his handcuffs with unwavering authority, now trembled as he tried to process the shock. The rich neighborhood around him, usually buzzing with the quiet hum of luxury and routine, fell into an uneasy silence. Whispers began to ripple through the small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. A middle-aged man at a nearby cafe, who'd been casually sipping his coffee, leaned over to his friend and murmured, "Did you see that? That cop? He just lost it." Others exchanged glances, their faces etched with surprise and a hint of vindication, as if witnessing a long-overdue reckoning. The street, usually so predictable, now pulsed with raw emotion and uncertainty. Derek's mind raced. He had spent years asserting his power, bullying those he saw as beneath him, never once imagining that someone he had tormented could turn the tables so completely. His thoughts churned in a chaotic blend of anger and regret. "What have I done?" he silently questioned, as his once unshakable sense of superiority began to crumble. In his heart, he felt the sting of every harsh word he had ever thrown, every moment he had degraded people he thought were beneath him. Now, faced with the undeniable proof of his own vulnerability, he felt a crushing weight of guilt. Meanwhile, Jamal Carter, quiet, steady, and resolute, watched from a short distance. His eyes, reflecting both compassion and a hardened determination born of a lifetime on the fringes, remained fixed on the unfolding scene. He did not celebrate, nor did he gloat. Instead, there was an almost imperceptible nod, as if affirming that every action has its consequences. For Jamal, this was never about revenge. It was about a final act of self-respect and the reclaiming of dignity for those who had long been invisible. In the background, residents of the upscale neighborhood began to emerge from their private worlds. A group of young professionals walking their dogs stopped in their tracks, their faces turning from casual curiosity to serious contemplation. Conversations broke out in hushed tones. "I can't believe a cop like him could fall for something like that," one said. "It's like karma finally caught up with him," another added. The buzz was growing on social media too. Smartphones captured the moment and shared it instantly, turning the event into a viral statement on power, prejudice, and the unexpected twists of fate. Back on the street, as Derek slowly regained his composure, his eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, and the familiar comfort of his uniform and badge now felt like a burden. In that heavy silence, he realized that the power he once wielded without question was slipping away. The streetlights glinted off his sweaty brow as he fumbled for his radio, his voice barely audible when he tried to speak, a stark contrast to the authoritative tone he had used moments before. Across the block, a small group of bystanders began to form a tight circle, their faces etched with shock and a growing sense of moral clarity. Among them, an older gentleman with kind eyes shook his head slowly, muttering, "That cop never thought he'd be on the receiving end of his own cruelty." His words, simple and earnest, resonated with those listening, reinforcing the unspoken truth that true power isn't measured by force, but by the strength to do what is right, even when it means standing alone. As the sirens grew louder and the first hints of an official response reached the neighborhood, the scene took on a surreal, almost cinematic quality. The rich, manicured world of the neighborhood seemed to pause, every polished surface and elegant facade now a silent witness to a moment of profound transformation. For Derek, the day had turned into a harsh lesson, a lesson in humility, accountability, and the high cost of unchecked prejudice. In that moment, the stage was set for a reckoning that would extend far beyond the confrontation on the sidewalk, a reckoning that would force everyone, from the privileged to the oppressed, to question the true meaning of power and dignity. After the incident on the sidewalk, Officer Ryan Collins found himself alone in the back seat of his patrol car, the engine's steady hum a harsh contrast to the storm raging inside him. The world outside, once a familiar tapestry of affluent streets and confident strides, had morphed into a surreal landscape of regret and self-doubt. Every flash of a passing car, every distant sound, reminded him of the moment when his authority had been brutally stripped away by the very person he had belittled for so long. Driving home in a state of shock, Ryan's mind replayed that fateful instant over and over. The cold command he had barked, the smug expression on his face as he approached Jamal, and then the sudden, inexplicable sight of the judicial badge that had shattered his sense of invincibility. It was as if a mirror had been held up to him, reflecting back every harsh word and every moment of cruelty he had inflicted upon those he deemed inferior. With each repetition, the weight of his past actions bore down on him more heavily than before. When he finally pulled into his modest apartment complex, a far cry from the polished streets he patrolled, Ryan sat in the quiet darkness of his living room. The familiar ticking of the clock on the wall served as a constant reminder that time was passing, but nothing was changing in his mind. Yet, as the silence deepened, so did his inner conflict. He found himself staring blankly at old photographs of himself in uniform, images that once symbolized pride and authority. Now they seemed to mock him with the stark contrast between who he had been and the man he now was. Unable to shake the image of Jamal's steady, unyielding gaze, Ryan's thoughts turned inward. How could I have been so blind? He whispered to himself in the dark. The realization that his badge, a symbol he had clung to with unwavering pride, was now nothing more than a tool of his own arrogance, sent a jolt of painful clarity through his entire being. His hands, once so sure and steady, trembled with the raw intensity of guilt and regret. In a moment of bitter introspection, Ryan reached for an old journal he kept hidden away, a relic of a time when he had believed in justice and fairness. Flipping through its yellowed pages, he began to read entries that spoke of a younger, idealistic officer who had joined the force with a heart full of hope. Those words, once a source of inspiration, now clashed violently with the reality of his actions. The contrast was unbearable. Tears, unbidden and raw, welled in his eyes as he confronted the truth of how far he had strayed from his original path. Outside his window, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the quiet storm within this once confident cop. In the solitude of that night, Ryan made a decision, a promise to himself that he would no longer let his past define his future. He resolved to seek redemption, to transform the arrogance and prejudice that had cost him his dignity. The journey ahead would be long and filled with discomfort, but the flicker of hope ignited by that one unexpected moment of clarity urged him to take the first step. Ryan penned a brief note in his journal. Today I lost more than power. I lost a part of who I thought I was, but tomorrow I will begin to rebuild. Those words, simple and raw, carried the promise of change. As the clock ticked toward dawn, he stared out at the darkened city, vowing silently that he would transform his career and himself by embracing true accountability and compassion. In that solitary hour, amidst the echoes of regret and the silent hum of his thoughts, the seeds of transformation were planted. Ryan Collins, the cop who once ruled with a heavy hand, now faced the most daunting challenge of all: to reclaim his humanity and rebuild a life defined not by authority, but by empathy and genuine respect. The following morning, the city awoke to whispers of a scandal that had spread like wildfire. In the sterile fluorescent light of a precinct meeting room, Officer Ryan Collins sat at a long conference table, surrounded by his colleagues and higher-ups. The air was heavy with tension and unspoken judgment, every face reflecting shock at the previous day's events. A day when a single act of unexpected compassion had upended the very notion of authority. Ryan's hand still trembled slightly as he clutched a cold cup of coffee, its steam mingling with the weight of his own remorse. The room, usually filled with routine chatter about shifts and patrol routes, was now a forum for raw, uncomfortable truth. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Matthews, cleared his throat and began, "Yesterday, one of our own was caught in an act that has shaken the foundation of this department." His voice, measured and stern, hung in the air as all eyes fixed on Ryan. Whispers filled the space as supervisors and fellow officers exchanged glances, some sympathetic, others accusatory. For many, Ryan's fall from grace was a mirror reflecting decades of unchecked bias. For others, it was a stark warning that no one was immune to the consequences of their actions. The department's internal affairs had already begun an investigation, and the incident was rapidly making headlines on local news and social media. Outside the precinct, the community was stirring. Social media posts showed clips of the confrontation, the moment when Ryan's power had crumbled before the unwavering gaze of the young savior. Neighbors and everyday citizens, once silent on matters of racial injustice, now filled online spaces with voices demanding accountability. The viral spread of that single moment had ignited a collective call for change, a call that reached even the upper echelons of city leadership. Back in the meeting room, Ryan's mind was a storm of self-reproach and determination. "I was wrong," he whispered, almost inaudibly, as he recalled the piercing look in Jamal's eyes, the look that had shattered his self-importance. The silence that followed his confession was thick, laden with the understanding that his years of cruelty and arrogance had finally caught up with him. It was not punishment alone that now pressed down on him, but the painful realization that he had contributed to a system built on inequality and disrespect. Lieutenant Matthews continued, "We must learn from this. Our duty is to serve with integrity, not to wield power as a weapon." His words, though calm, reverberated like a call to arms within the room. Some officers nodded in reluctant agreement, while others stared at the floor, their expressions clouded with uncertainty and fear. In that charged atmosphere, the promise of reform was as tangible as the cold stares in Ryan's eyes. Across the city, news reporters captured the unfolding drama. A cop known for his harshness now left to face the music. The local newspaper headlined, "Badge of Shame, a cop's reckoning with racism," while community meetings began to buzz with the possibilities of a more compassionate, accountable system. People started asking hard questions. How long would unchecked prejudice continue to go unchallenged? What did true authority look like when stripped of its arrogance? As Ryan left the meeting, his steps were heavy with the weight of change. The bustling streets outside felt different now, more charged, as if the city itself was waiting for justice to be served. His internal journey had become a public spectacle, one that forced everyone, from rank-and-file officers to ordinary citizens, to reckon with the legacy of discrimination. In that moment, as the cool morning air mingled with the distant sound of sirens and murmurs of protest, Ryan realized that the path to redemption was no longer a solitary journey. It was a shared responsibility, a commitment to rebuilding trust and ensuring that every individual, no matter their past, was treated with dignity. The reverberations of his personal reckoning had sparked a wider movement, one that promised to reshape not just his future, but the very face of authority in the city. As the city slowly woke to a new day, the first light of dawn revealed a changed world. The incident on that quiet street had ignited a spark that now spread far beyond one cop's shattered authority. Officer Ryan Collins, once brimming with misplaced pride, now found himself standing at a crossroads. The internal reckoning he had experienced in the dark hours of the previous night had transformed into a burning desire for true accountability. At a press conference held at the police headquarters, Ryan stepped forward with a heavy heart but steady voice. Before a room filled with reporters, fellow officers, and community leaders, he confessed, I let my arrogance blind me. I hurt people I should have protected. I am here to take responsibility. His admission, simple yet raw, sent ripples through the crowd. Some faces reflected relief and hope that change was finally coming, while others, long entrenched in the old ways, wore expressions of disbelief. Yet for Ryan, this was no longer about saving face. It was about building a future founded on respect and fairness. Across the city, the story had become a catalyst for broader reform. Community meetings were held in neighborhood centers and small cafes where residents shared their own experiences of injustice, urging local authorities to implement meaningful change. Social media buzzed with heartfelt messages and calls for a reformed system, one that treated everyone with dignity. In living rooms and public parks, the message was clear. Every act of cruelty had consequences, and even those who once wielded power without question must be held accountable. In the days that followed, a series of tangible changes began to take shape. New training programs on implicit bias were rolled out throughout the department. Officers were encouraged to engage with community members in honest dialogue, and a task force was established to review past incidents and prevent future abuses. Ryan's personal journey of transformation became a symbol of hope, proof that even the most deeply ingrained prejudices could be dismantled through courage and humility. Meanwhile, the community itself felt the shift. At local town hall meetings, neighbors spoke passionately about building bridges between law enforcement and the people they served. A mural was unveiled in a busy intersection depicting a powerful image, a young black boy whose steady eyes had once saved a life, standing tall beside a remorseful cop. The artwork, vibrant and raw, captured the collective yearning for a society where respect triumphs over arrogance. Back at home, Ryan sat alone in his modest apartment, his worn journal open on the table. He reread the entry he had written during that long, dark night. Today I lost a part of who I thought I was, but tomorrow I begin to rebuild. Those words now resonated with a renewed purpose. He understood that redemption wasn't a single act, but a long, winding journey toward making amends and restoring faith in the system he had once sworn to protect. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the city in a warm, forgiving light, the final scenes of the day unfolded like a quiet promise. Neighbors greeted one another with genuine smiles, conversations flowed freely on sidewalks, and even the street, once a silent witness to abuse of power, seemed to hum with the energy of a community ready to heal. For Ryan, the day was a testament to the idea that change starts with one brave step and spreads like wildfire through the hearts of those willing to listen. In that breathtaking moment of transformation, every viewer is reminded, true strength comes from the willingness to confront our darkest flaws, to learn from our mistakes, and to rebuild a better world, one act of kindness at a time. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join the conversation, because every voice matters in the fight for justice, and together we can inspire real change.